Mysterious Ancient Mariners.
Part 11. Alexander and Nearchus the Great. From the moment Alexander the Great began his conquest, he moved with a velocity and audacity that left his enemies reeling. Bold to the point of recklessness, he led his 35,000-strong army with unmatched flair, relishing the chaos of battle and the art of swift, decisive command. Eastward he marched, sweeping through Asia Minor and the Levant, scattering Persian forces like leaves before the wind. He pressed south into Egypt, subduing all resistance before turning his gaze east once more. His army surged through the heart of the Persian Empire and on toward the mysterious lands of India, reaching the Indus River by 326 BC. At the Indus, his indefatigable shipwrights constructed a fleet of galleys to ferry the troops across. Yet, beyond the river, the subcontinent seemed to rise against him. Monsoon rains turned the land into a swampy mire. Rivers swelled to impassable torrents, and the armies of the region met him with a new and terrifying weapon: elephants, their sheer size and wild fury striking terror into the hearts of Alexander's soldiers and horses alike. Each mile was hard won, and after a grueling year, the army had only advanced 250 miles beyond the Indus. By then, Alexander's troops had marched for nearly 8 years and covered an astonishing 8,000 miles. Exhausted, homesick, and daunted by the endless horizon of hostile terrain, they finally mutinied, refusing to go any farther. Near Nicaea, on the Hydaspes River, Alexander acquiesced, halting his march eastward. Yet, even in retreat, he saw opportunity. He set his shipwrights to work, building a vast fleet of 1,800 transports and galleys. Once completed, this armada ferried the troops down the Hydaspes and Indus rivers, with the bulk of the army marching alongside on land. The combined force traversed the 800 miles to the river's delta in 9 arduous months. In the late summer of 325 BC, Alexander sailed into the Indian Ocean, offering a libation to the gods of the deep. With a golden cup cast into the waves, he marked the beginning of a new chapter, consolidating his empire and linking its vast expanse by sea. The task of forging this maritime connection fell to Nearchus, a seasoned Cretan mariner. Although some of the fleet had been lost on the descent of the Indus, Nearchus took command of the remaining ships, manning them with soldiers who had experience at sea. His mission was daunting: navigate westward along the northern Indian Ocean, round the Persian Gulf, and sail up the Tigris River to rendezvous with Alexander in Susa. The voyage was fraught with peril. The first challenge came almost immediately, as late summer monsoon winds pounded the fleet, pinning the ships in the Indus estuary. For weeks, Nearchus could only wait. When the winds eased in September, he ventured forth only to encounter the roaring fury of a tidal bore, a massive surge of water from the Indian Ocean that swept upriver, damaging and destroying his ships. Recovering quickly, Nearchus ordered his men to cut through a silt bar at the river's mouth during low tide, creating a channel that allowed the fleet to pass into the open ocean at slack water. Progress still remained slow, however. Just 20 miles west of the Indus, the fleet was forced to take shelter in what is now Karachi. There, Nearchus's men fortified their camps with rocks, keeping wary watch over hostile tribesmen who loomed nearby. For 24 tense days, they subsisted on mussels and oysters, waiting for the monsoon to abate. At last, in late October, the fleet set sail yet again. Nearchus hugged the coastline, navigating narrow channels where the oars scraped against the rocks, and threading his way between treacherous shoals. On rougher stretches, the fleet was forced farther out to sea, where the heavy surf and the monotony of the waves left the crew seasick and disheartened. Nights at sea brought little respite. Fearful of hidden hazards, Nearchus anchored at dusk, leaving the men to sleep fitfully in their cramped galleys. Even when landfall was possible, new hardships awaited. Many stretches of the coastline were barren, offering no fresh water or provisions. The sailors, parched and desperate, found themselves battling not only the elements but their own bodies, drained by exhaustion and thirst. Through it all, Nearchus pressed forward, recording his trials in a journal that would later inspire any who would read it. Though his fleet faced hardships that would have broken lesser men, Nearchus's unyielding resolve brought the expedition ever closer to its goal: a maritime bridge that would unite Alexander's vast empire and secure its legacy across the known world. As Nearchus and his weary sailors navigated the desolate coastline, the sight of a village raised their hopes for food and rest. But the shore was alive with 600 tribesmen armed with thick, heavy spears and a menacing resolve. Assessing the situation, Nearchus quickly devised a bold plan. He observed that the enemy's spears, though formidable in close combat, were useless as projectiles. Seizing the advantage, he ordered his strongest swimmers overboard. They were to form ranks in the shallows, their arrows ready, and rush forward with a fearsome war cry while the archers on the galleys provided covering fire. The Greeks surged toward the shore with a determination born of desperation, their shouts echoing over the water. For a moment the tribesmen held their ground, but the ferocity of the charge overwhelmed them. They turned and fled in chaos, leaving the Greeks to claim the village. Among their captives were peculiar figures clad in animal hides and fish skins, their bodies hairy, their nails long and claw-like, adapted for splitting wood and fish in the absence of metal tools. These strange villagers seemed as much a part of their harsh environment as the desolate land itself. After appropriating the provisions and repairing their battered ships, Nearchus and his men continued their odyssey. Other settlements offered less resistance, and at one village the inhabitants even greeted them warmly, presenting a gift of sheep. Yet the sailors were taken aback by the peculiar taste of the mutton, seemingly infused with the essence of fish. Their hosts explained with causal pragmatism that their barren land provided no fodder, forcing them to feed their livestock on fish. The coastline offered little relief to these Mediterranean seafarers. It was a bleak, unforgiving land where life clung to existence by subsisting on the sea. The inhabitants harvested crabs, oysters, and fish, drying the larger catches under the relentless sun and pounding them into a meal. The few scraggly palm trees were stripped to make fishing nets, for the people had no boats to venture beyond the shore. Whales, when they ventured too close and became stranded, were not consumed for their meat. Instead, the massive creatures were left to rot until their stench subsided. Then the resourceful villagers harvested the bones, using ribs for rafters and jaws for doors in their crude huts. At sea, the Greeks encountered living whales for the first time. Towering spouts of water shot into the sky as the colossal creatures surfaced, prompting awe and terror among the sailors. So astonished were they that they dropped their oars, momentarily paralyzed. But Nearchus, ever resolute, rallied his men. Trumpets blared, oars splashed, and shouts filled the air as they charged at the whales, scaring them into diving beneath the ships and surfacing at a safe distance. The voyage took a mystical turn near the mouth of the Kalami River, on the coast of modern-day Pakistan. There, a transport ship from the fleet vanished. A local pilot spun a fantastical tale. The nearby island was the domain of an enchantress who seduced sailors and turned them into fish. Determined to uncover the truth, Nearchus sent a galley to circle the island, its crew calling out for their lost comrades. No answer came. Undeterred by superstition, Nearchus led his men ashore, finding no sign of magic nor of the missing vessel. The most likely explanation was grim but mundane. The transport had foundered on the island's treacherous shoals. The story of the enchanted island joined the growing mythology of Nearchus's journey, a mixture of courage, hardship, and curiosity that mirrored the spirit of exploration and conquest that had propelled Alexander's campaigns. Despite adversity, the fleet pressed on. Each mile covered brought them closer to the Persian Gulf and the promise of reunion with Alexander's grand empire. For the Greeks, these barren shores and strange encounters underscored the enormity of their undertaking, a journey into lands and waters unknown where myths and reality blended as one. By December of 325 BC, Nearchus and his fleet, battered but resolute, finally reached the Gulf of Oman and turned northward into the Persian Gulf. It was as though the gods themselves had relented, granting the weary sailors an oasis of relief. Here they found fresh water in abundance and provisions enough to ease their relentless hunger. For men accustomed to barren shores and grueling seas, this abundance must have felt like the promised land. Some of the crew ventured inland, driven by curiosity and the hope of further supplies. What they found was beyond their wildest expectation. A lone figure emerged, a man dressed in a Greek mantle, speaking fluent Greek. After months of alien landscapes, foreign tongues, and unrelenting hardship, the sound of their native language was a balm to their souls. The man explained that he was a straggler from Alexander's army and brought extraordinary news. The king himself was only a 5-day march from the coast. This revelation electrified Nearchus and his men. Selecting an aide and 5 of his sailors, Nearchus sent off immediately to deliver word to Alexander. The journey was another grueling trial. By the time the bedraggled group arrived at Alexander's headquarters, they were barely recognizable. Filthy, salt-encrusted, their skin weathered and sallow from privation. Alexander, who had endured his own ordeal leading a vast army across the harsh deserts of Pakistan and Persia, had long feared the fleet's loss. Upon hearing that the galleys were safe, he wept tears of joy. "The salvation of my fleet," he declared, "brings me greater happiness than conquering all of Asia." For a man whose ambitions had no bounds, it was a rare moment of pure relief and gratitude. Alexander proposed that Nearchus accompany him to Babylon, entrusting the fleet's final leg to another officer. But Nearchus, ever dutiful, declined. "It is my duty, O king," he replied simply, choosing to return to his sailors and his ships. He reunited with his fleet and led them on the final stretch to Susa, a journey of nearly 2 months. When they reached the city in 324 BC, Alexander was there to greet them, relieved to see that the fleet was fully accounted for. Though their naval odyssey had ended, the tale of Alexander's empire was nearing a tragic close. The expedition traveled overland to Babylon, where Alexander was struck down with a sudden fever. On June 13, 323 BC, at just 32 years old, the man who had reshaped the known world passed into legend. Nearchus's 1,000-mile, 5-month voyage was a feat of endurance and discovery. While Indian, Persian, and Arabian traders had plied the waters between the Persian Gulf and India for centuries, it was Nearchus who unveiled this vital maritime link to the Greeks. His detailed journal provided a navigational blueprint for future sailors, laying the groundwork for a new era of commerce between East and West. Yet for all its promise, the unity Alexander envisioned for his empire unraveled after his death. His generals, consumed by ambition, carved the vast domain into 3 parts. Antigonus claimed Macedonia and Greece. Ptolemy established his dynasty in Egypt. And Seleucus seized Syria and Asia Minor. The empire was no more, but the pathways Alexander and Nearchus forged remained. The connections they built, both overland and across the seas, would endure, shaping the ancient world for centuries to come. The aftermath of Alexander the Great's empire saw a world in flux, its balance of power now contested at sea. Ptolemy, inheriting the Egyptian heart of Alexander's domain, seized much of his fleet and set out to establish Egypt as the Mediterranean's leading naval power. Yet Antigonus, ruling Macedonia and Greece, would not let the Greeks be reduced to second-class seafarers. Thus began one of history's first naval arms races. In their relentless rivalry, the 2 powers built even larger and more elaborate warships, quadriremes, quinqueremes, and even galleys with ranks of rowers extending up to 16 tiers. The 16er, a behemoth requiring 1,800 oarsmen, symbolized the escalating extravagance of the contest. For over 50 years, these colossal vessels clashed in a series of battles, the eastern Mediterranean transformed into a theater of naval warfare. The most brilliant tactician of this era was Demetrius, son of Antigonus. In 306 BC, during a decisive engagement off Salamis in Cyprus, he outmaneuvered the Egyptian fleet by deliberately forming an unbalanced line. Slowly, he encircled Ptolemy's ships, cutting them off from their reserves on shore. When Ptolemy realized his rowers were exhausted, he retreated, leaving Demetrius to capture the 120 Egyptian vessels. For nearly 2 decades, Demetrius dominated the eastern Mediterranean. But political turmoil eventually toppled him, allowing Egyptian sea power to rise anew. Even so, the heyday of these enormous warships was short-lived. Their size and complexity made them prohibitively expensive to maintain, and by the middle of the 3rd century BC, both navies had lost their vigor. One of Demetrius's grand 16ers, discovered rotting in a Macedonian dockyard in 168 BC, had not seen action for 70 years, a relic of a bygone era. While warships became ever more extravagant, Mediterranean commerce flourished, spurred on by Alexander's opening of new trade routes to Asia. Ports expanded into hubs of activity, their harbors protected by stone breakwaters. None was grander than Alexandria, the jewel of Egypt and the legacy of its founder. with its 400-foot lighthouse guiding merchant ships into a harbor capable of accommodating 1,200 vessels. Alexandria was a marvel of engineering and commerce. Its docks teemed with goods from every corner of the known world: timber, marble, wine, and wool from the Mediterranean, frankincense, myrrh, and ivory from Arabia and Somaliland, spices, tortoiseshell, and cosmetics from India. Even elephants, caught along Africa's east coast, were brought to Alexandria for training as war beasts. The Ptolemies revolutionized trade by developing an all-sea trade route to India. The Egyptian navy patrolled the Red Sea, clearing it of the pirates who had plagued merchants for centuries, ensuring the safety of this vital corridor. This innovation bypassed the grueling caravan routes across Persia and Asia Minor, bringing the East closer to the Mediterranean. Merchant ships grew larger and more sophisticated, their designs catering to both cargo and passengers. The average vessel could now carry 250 tons, with the largest exceeding 1,000. These hulking freighters adopted new sails for greater efficiency, including a forward-raked bowsprit, square sail, and a triangular topsail. Even some mounted a mizzen sail to the stern for better wind capture. These improvements allowed for ships to travel faster and farther, linking Alexandria with ports like Tyre, Sidon, Rhodes, and Byblos. Meanwhile, in the western Mediterranean, another power was stirring. Around 200 BC, the upstart Romans entered the maritime arena. With ambitions as vast as the sea itself, they would soon impose their will on the waters Alexander's successors had fought so fiercely to control. The rise of Rome would signal the dawn of a new era, one where the Mediterranean became Mare Nostrum, our sea, as the Romans would call it, a domain they would dominate for centuries to come.